I'm Sarah, and I'm 26. My father left me alone at a gas station on a stormy night, saying I needed to learn a lesson. He drove off laughing, but when he looked in the rearview mirror, I was smiling as I got into a black SUV, because my bodyguard had been with me the whole time. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt abandoned by family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up standing in freezing rain at a Texaco station at 11 p.m. on a Thursday night. Because honestly, even for my family, this was a new low. It started 3 days earlier during what was supposed to be a simple dinner at my parents' house in Arlington. My mother had made her famous pot roast, the one she only brings out when she wants something. My brother Jake was there with his wife Michelle, both of them looking smug in that way that immediately put me on edge. "Sarah, honey," my mother began, passing the potatoes with her practiced smile. "Your father and I have been talking. Here we go." In my family, talking usually meant plotting how to extract money from my trust fund. You'd think having wealthy grandparents who left me well provided for would be a blessing. Instead, it turned me into a walking ATM for relatives who couldn't manage their own finances. "We know you've been generous with the family," my father continued, cutting his meat with surgical precision. "But Jake and Michelle are looking at a house. And well, their credit situation is complicated." Complicated. That's what we call Jake's gambling problem and Michelle's shopping addiction. They'd already burned through 2 inheritance checks and a loan from my mother's sister. "How much?" I asked, because there was no point in pretending this was a social dinner. "50,000, Jake said quickly, like ripping off a Band-Aid. "Just until the market turns around. I've got some investments that are about to pay off." The same investments he'd been talking about for 3 years. The same sure-thing deals that had already cost him his first marriage and nearly his job. "That's a lot of money, Jake." "It's not like you can't afford it," Michelle chimed in, her voice taking on that whiny edge I'd learned to hate. "You inherited more than all of us combined." True. But I'd also learned the hard way that family loans were really family gifts wrapped in guilt and false promises. The last time I helped Jake, he promised to pay me back within 6 months. That was 18 months ago. "I need to think about it," I said, which was code for absolutely not, but I was hoping to avoid a scene. That's when my father's expression changed. The jovial family patriarch mask slipped, revealing something colder underneath. "Think about what exactly?" His voice carried a warning. "Your family needs help, and you're sitting on money you didn't even earn." The "didn't earn" comment stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. My grandparents had set up a trust that provided me more financial security than most people see in a lifetime. But they'd also taught me to be careful with it, to think of it as a responsibility rather than a right. "I've helped before," I said carefully. "Multiple times. But this isn't sustainable, Dad." "Sustainable?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Listen to yourself. You sound like some Wall Street shark talking about family like it's a business transaction." The dinner devolved from there. Michelle started crying about how they might lose the house. Jake got defensive and started listing all the ways I'd benefited from family support over the years. My mother just sat there, occasionally nodding in agreement with whoever was speaking loudest. But it was my father's final words that sealed what happened 3 days later. "Maybe you need to remember what it's like to not have everything handed to you." I should have seen it coming. The lesson started innocently enough. My father called Wednesday morning, asking if I needed a ride to my appointment with my financial advisor downtown. My car was in the shop for routine maintenance, so I said yes. Big mistake. He picked me up at noon, chatting pleasantly about work and the weather. Classic dad behavior, pretending Tuesday night's dinner disaster never happened. We were halfway across town when he suddenly pulled into that gas station. "I need to grab something," he said, leaving the engine running. "Stay here." He came back 5 minutes later with coffee and a strange expression. "Actually, Sarah, I think it's time you understood something about the real world." That's when he told me to get out. "This is ridiculous, Dad. My appointment is in 20 minutes. Cancel it." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Walk home, figure it out. Maybe spending a few hours without your trust fund safety net will give you some perspective on helping family." I stared at him through the passenger window, rain starting to spatter the glass. "You're seriously going to abandon your daughter at a gas station?" "I'm giving you a reality check," he said, already putting the car in reverse. "Call me when you're ready to be part of this family again." And then he drove off. I stood there for a moment, more shocked than angry. Cars splashed through puddles around me as the rain intensified. The temperature was dropping fast, and I was wearing a thin blazer and heels. Not exactly hiking gear. But here's what dear old dad didn't know. My grandparents hadn't just left me money. They'd also taught me to be prepared for anything, including relatives who might try to manipulate or endanger me. Marcus had been following us at a discreet distance since we left my apartment. He was good at his job. Former military, recommended by my financial advisor after I'd mentioned some concerning behavior from family members. Most of the time, his presence was purely precautionary. Today, it was life-saving. The black SUV pulled up 30 seconds after my father's taillights disappeared into traffic. "Everything all right, Miss Sarah?" Marcus asked through the lowered window. I couldn't help but smile, imagining my father's face when he inevitably looked back to check on his abandoned daughter, only to see me climbing into what probably looked like a very expensive rescue. "Just family being family," I said, settling into the heated passenger seat. "Let's go to my appointment." "Should I follow your father home first?" Marcus asked with the kind of professional calm that suggested this wasn't his first family drama. "No need," I said, buckling my seatbelt. "He'll figure out soon enough that his lesson backfired." But as we drove toward downtown, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. This wasn't just about money anymore. My father hadn't just asked for help or even demanded it. He'd tried to use fear and abandonment as weapons against his own daughter, and that changed everything. My phone started buzzing 20 minutes later as we sat in the financial advisor's office. Dad, probably wondering why I hadn't called begging for rescue yet. I let it go to voicemail. The second call came 10 minutes after that, then a third. By the time my appointment ended, I had 7 missed calls and 4 increasingly frantic text messages. "Where are you? Sarah, this isn't funny anymore. Call me back right now. I'm coming to get you." I deleted them all without responding. Marcus drove me home in comfortable silence, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror with the alertness of someone trained to spot trouble. I spent the ride thinking about patterns, not just my father's behavior, but my own responses to it. Every time my family pushed boundaries, I'd eventually given in to keep the peace. Every loan, every bailout, every time I'd swallowed my frustration to avoid confrontation. I'd been enabling them while telling myself I was helping. But leaving your daughter alone in a storm crosses a line you can't uncross. "Miss Sarah," Marcus said as we pulled into my apartment complex, "should I be concerned about escalation from your family?" Smart question. In his line of work, family members were often the biggest threat to a client's safety. Honestly, I don't know anymore. It felt strange admitting that about people who were supposed to love and protect me. My phone rang again as I unlocked my apartment door. This time it was my mother. "Sarah Elizabeth, where are you?" "Your father is beside himself." "I'm home, Mom. Safe and sound." "Thank goodness. He said you were stranded at that gas station. How did you get home?" "Interesting. So he had been checking on me after all." "I figured it out," I said simply. A pause. "Well, get in your car and drive over here right now. Your father wants to talk to you. My car's still in the shop, remember? That's why I needed a ride in the first place. Then take an Uber." "Sarah, he's very upset about how you left things." The audacity was breathtaking. He was upset about how I left things? "Mom, he abandoned me at a gas station in a thunderstorm because I wouldn't immediately agree to give Jake $50,000. I think his feelings can wait. Don't be so dramatic. It was just meant to teach you—" "Teach me what? That my family will use fear and abandonment to manipulate me when I don't comply fast enough?" I could hear her intake of breath. In our family, speaking this directly about dysfunction was like breaking a sacred rule. "Sarah, that's not— Your father loves you. We all do. But sometimes love means tough lessons. Tough lessons don't involve leaving people stranded in dangerous situations, Mom." Another pause, longer this time. "I think everyone just needs to cool down," she said finally. "Why don't you come for dinner Sunday and we'll all discuss this like adults?" Like adults. Right. Because abandoning your daughter for not funding your son's gambling habit was peak adult behavior. "I'll think about it," I said, knowing I wouldn't be going anywhere near their house until some serious conversations happened. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, watching rain streak down the windows. My phone continued buzzing with messages from Jake and Michelle, each one more demanding than the last. "Have you even talked to Dad about what happened? He's really worried about you. Mom says you're being stubborn about the house thing. This is exactly why Dad wanted to teach you a lesson. You're being selfish." "Sarah, family is supposed to help family." That last one from Michelle made me laugh out loud. Family helps family? Where was the family helping when I was standing in a storm at a gas station? I turned off my phone and ran a hot bath. Tomorrow I'd figure out how to handle this mess. Tonight I just wanted to appreciate the luxury of being warm, safe, and free from people who thought abandonment was an acceptable teaching tool. But as I sank into the water, one thought kept circling back. If my father was willing to go this far, over $50,000, what would he do when he found out about the real money? Have you ever experienced family members who mistake your kindness for weakness? The next morning brought clarity along with coffee. I'd spent 26 years managing relationships with people who saw my inheritance as their personal emergency fund. Last night had simply made the dynamic impossible to ignore. I called my financial advisor first. "David, it's Sarah. I need to discuss some security measures for my accounts." "Of course." "Is this related to the incident yesterday?" David knew about the family pressure, because he'd seen it before with other clients. Sudden wealth, even inherited wealth, had a way of bringing out the worst in relatives. "I think it's time to be more proactive about protecting my assets." We spent an hour discussing legal safeguards, trust restructuring, and what he diplomatically called boundary enforcement strategies. By the time I hung up, I had a plan that would make it significantly harder for anyone to pressure, manipulate, or intimidate me into financial decisions. My second call was to Marcus. "I want to retain your services on a more permanent basis," I told him. Yesterday made it clear that my family situation might require ongoing security considerations. "Understood. Should I prepare a comprehensive threat assessment?" The fact that we were discussing my parents and siblings in terms of threat assessment should have been heartbreaking. Instead, it felt like taking control of my life for the first time. "Yes. And Marcus? I want to know everything. Financial records, legal issues, business dealings. If they're going to treat me like an ATM, I want to understand exactly what I'm funding. I'll have a preliminary report by Monday." The afternoon brought a surprise visitor. Jake showed up at my apartment building, which should have been impossible since the building required key card access and visitor approval. But Jake had always been charming when he needed something. I watched from my window as he paced in the lobby, checking his phone and trying to look pitiful. After 10 minutes, I buzzed him up. Might as well get this confrontation over with. "Sarah, thank God," he said when I opened the door. "I was worried sick when Dad told us what happened." "Were you worried sick when he left me stranded? Or only when you realized it might affect your loan request?" Jake had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Look, I know Dad handled things badly, but you have to understand the pressure he's under. Mom's been on him about Michelle and the house situation, and you know how he gets when he feels cornered. So I'm supposed to be understanding about being abandoned in a storm because Dad felt cornered?" "It wasn't supposed to rain that hard," Jake said weakly. I stared at my brother, wondering when he'd become someone I barely recognized. The Jake I grew up with was irresponsible and self-centered, but he wasn't cruel. This version, standing in my living room making excuses for endangering me over money, felt like a stranger. "Jake, sit down, we need to talk." He perked up, probably thinking I was about to cave like I usually did. "I'm not giving you $50,000, I said without preamble. "I'm not giving you $5,000. I'm not giving you $500. The family bank is closed." His face went through several expressions. Shock, anger, calculation. "Sarah, be reasonable. It's not like you need the money. You spend more than 50 grand on vacations. How I spend my money is my business. How you manage yours is your responsibility. We're family," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "Family doesn't abandon each other at gas stations during storms. Jake, family doesn't manipulate and threaten when they don't get what they want." I watched him process this, seeing the moment he realized his usual tactics wouldn't work. "Fine," he said, standing abruptly. "But don't expect us to keep pretending you're part of this family when you clearly think you're better than the rest of us." "I don't think I'm better than anyone. I just refuse to be treated worse than everyone else." After he left, I made one more call. To my lawyer. It was time to make some changes that would protect me regardless of what my family decided to do next. But I had no idea how far they were willing to go to get what they thought they deserved. Marcus's report arrived Monday morning via secure email. I read it twice, each page making my stomach sink a little further. Jake owed money to people who weren't patient about repayment. Not just credit cards and the mortgage company, but private lenders who charged interest rates that would make loan sharks blush. Michelle's spending had escalated from expensive purses to what appeared to be a serious shopping addiction, complete with hidden credit cards and secret storage units full of unused purchases. But the real surprise was my parents' financial situation. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage. My father's small business was failing, and they'd been hiding it behind a facade of middle-class stability. The pot roast dinners, the comfortable house, the casual requests for family loans, all of it was theater designed to hide desperation. "Miss Sarah," Marcus said when I called him after finishing the report, "there's something else you should know. Your brother made some calls yesterday after leaving your apartment. We intercepted communications suggesting they're exploring legal options to challenge your trust. My grandparents had anticipated this possibility. The trust was ironclad, structured by lawyers who specialized in protecting assets from family predators. But that didn't mean my family wouldn't try, or that the attempt wouldn't be expensive and emotionally devastating. What kind of legal options? Competency challenges mostly, questioning whether you're mentally fit to manage the inheritance. It's a common tactic when families want to gain control of someone else's money. The betrayal hit me like ice water. Challenging my mental competency wasn't just about money. It was about destroying my reputation, my autonomy, my entire life. How serious is the threat? With their current financial resources? Limited. But if they find someone willing to fund the legal challenge in exchange for a percentage of the settlement, he didn't need to finish. There were always predatory lawyers willing to gamble on large estate challenges. I spent the day making calls, setting up additional legal protections, and arranging for independent psychological evaluations that would preempt any competency challenge. If my family wanted to paint me as mentally unfit, I'd have documentation from respected professionals stating otherwise. By evening, I felt like I'd built a fortress around my life. But fortresses only work if you're willing to live inside them. My phone rang at 8 p.m. Mom again. Sarah, honey. I think there's been some confusion about what happened with your father. No confusion. Mom, he left me at a gas station during a storm. Well, yes, but he thought you had your car with you. It was just miscommunication. The lies were getting more elaborate. Dad knew my car was in the shop. That's why I'd needed a ride in the first place. Mom, I know about the mortgage, the business problems, all of it. Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. I don't know what you think you know. I know you're 3 months behind on payments. I know Dad's business is failing. I know Jake owes money to people who aren't banks. Another pause. Longer this time. If you know we're struggling, she said finally, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it, then you understand why we need help. I understand why you think you need my money. But what happened Thursday night wasn't about help, Mom. It was about punishment. He was frustrated. He was dangerous. What if I hadn't found another way home? What if I'd been hurt trying to walk in that storm? You're being dramatic, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're willing to risk my safety to get access to my trust fund. The conversation ended with her hanging up on me, but not before I heard her start to cry. I felt terrible about making my mother cry. I felt worse about the fact that she was crying about getting caught, not about what they'd done to me. That night, I lay awake thinking about loyalty and love, about the difference between supporting family and enabling their worst behaviors. By morning, I knew what I had to do. It was time to stop playing defense and take control of the situation entirely. Tuesday morning, I called a family meeting, not at their house where they could control the environment, but at a restaurant downtown where public setting would keep everyone's worst impulses in check. I arrived early, chose a table in the center of the dining room where conversations would be visible but not easily overheard, and ordered coffee while I waited. They came in together, Mom, Dad, Jake, and Michelle, looking like they were attending a funeral. In a way, they were. The funeral of their assumption that I'd always caved to family pressure. Thank you for coming, I said as they settled into their chairs with obvious reluctance. Sarah, my father began, if this is about Thursday night, I want you to know it's about more than Thursday night, I interrupted. It's about establishing some new boundaries for how our family relationships will work going forward. Jake leaned back in his chair with theatrical exasperation. Here we go with the boundaries talk. Yes, here we go with the boundaries talk, I agreed pleasantly. Because apparently abandoning family members during storms is considered acceptable behavior in this family now. My mother flinched. My father's jaw tightened. First boundary, I continued, opening the folder I'd brought with me. No more surprise visits to my apartment. No more showing up uninvited. No more trying to manipulate building security to gain access. We're your family, Michelle protested. We shouldn't need appointments. Family members who respect each other don't need appointments. Family members who've been using manipulation and pressure tactics do. I slid the first document across the table. Second boundary. All requests for financial assistance must be submitted in writing, including detailed explanations of why the money is needed, how it will be used, and realistic repayment plans. Jake picked up the paper and scanned it quickly. This is insane. You want us to fill out loan applications to borrow money from family? I want you to treat financial requests with the seriousness they deserve instead of assuming I'm an unlimited resource. Third boundary, I continued, sliding another document toward my parents. Any future legal action taken against me or my trust will result in immediate and permanent cessation of all family financial support. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face had gone pale. You investigated us, my mother said quietly. I protected myself. There's a difference. This is blackmail, Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. This is self-preservation. I know about the competency challenge discussions. I know about the lawyer consultations. I know exactly how far you were willing to go to get access to money that isn't yours. My father finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Sarah, we never meant for things to go this far. But they did go this far, Dad. You left me stranded in a storm. Jake owes money to dangerous people. You're all struggling financially, and instead of having honest conversations about it, you chose manipulation and threats. I reached into my folder one final time and pulled out a cashier's check. This is $25,000, I said, placing it in the center of the table. It's enough to bring your mortgage current and give you some breathing room to figure out Dad's business situation. Their eyes fixed on the check like it was a lifeline. But, I continued, this is the last financial assistance any of you will receive from me unless and until you agree to these boundaries and prove you can honor them. You're serious, Michelle said, disbelief in her voice. Completely serious. You taught me Thursday night that I can't trust any of you to put my well-being above your financial needs. Until that changes, this is how our relationship works. My father reached for the check with trembling fingers. Sarah, don't apologize, Dad. Just decide whether you want a daughter or an ATM, because you can't have both. I stood up, leaving the documents and the check on the table. Take your time thinking it over. I'll be here when you're ready to have a real family relationship again. As I walked away, I heard Michelle whisper urgently, we have to take the money. We don't have a choice. But I knew that until they understood they'd always had a choice, the choice to treat me with respect, nothing would really change. What I didn't know was that $25,000 was about to become the least of our problems. The call came at 3 a.m. on Friday morning, Marcus sounding more alert than anyone should at that hour. Miss Sarah, we have a situation. Your family's house is on fire. I sat up in bed, instantly awake. What? Are they okay? Everyone's safe. They're at the hospital being treated for smoke inhalation, but no serious injuries. The fire department suspects arson. Arson. My blood went cold as the implications hit me. Jake's gambling debts. The dangerous people Marcus had mentioned in his report. The money I'd given them that was supposed to solve their problems. $25,000 hadn't been enough. I threw on clothes and met Marcus in the lobby 15 minutes later. The drive to my parents' neighborhood felt surreal, like moving through a nightmare where everything familiar had been twisted into something threatening. The house I'd grown up in was a blackened shell. Fire trucks were still on scene, their red and blue lights painting everything in emergency colors. Yellow tape cordoned off what used to be my childhood home. I found my family huddled together in the back of an ambulance, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen them. My mother was crying silently while my father stared at the ruins with hollow eyes. Jake sat apart from the others, guilt written across his face like a confession. Sarah! My mother reached for me as I approached. Thank God you're here. For a moment, all the boundaries and ultimatums from 3 days earlier felt petty and meaningless. These were my parents, and they'd just lost everything. Are you all hurt? I asked, accepting my mother's embrace despite everything that had happened between us. Just some smoke inhalation, my father said hoarsely. We got out in time. How did it start? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Jake wouldn't meet my eyes. Michelle was crying harder than seemed warranted for someone who'd escaped a fire uninjured. Jake, I said quietly, what did you do? It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he whispered, finally looking at me. I just needed more time to pay them back. They said they just wanted to scare me. The $25,000 hadn't gone to save their house or help their business. Jake had used it to make a partial payment to people who set houses on fire when they didn't get satisfied quickly enough. Who are they, Jake? My father answered instead, his voice flat with defeat. People your brother borrowed money from to cover his gambling debts, people who don't accept partial payments as final settlements. How much do you owe them? Jake's voice was barely audible. $80,000. $80,000. The 25 I'd given them had only made the dangerous people angrier because it proved Jake had access to money, but was still holding out on them. And they burned down Mom and Dad's house to send a message? They said next time it won't be empty, Michelle sobbed. They said next time people will be inside. I stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, watching my childhood home smolder, finally understanding the true cost of my family's dysfunction. This wasn't about helping relatives through temporary financial difficulties. This was about being dragged into a situation that could get people killed. "Where are you going to stay tonight?" I asked my parents. "We don't know," my mother said. "The Red Cross offered a hotel voucher, but it's only for 3 days." I thought about my apartment, about the security systems and safe building where Marcus could monitor who came and went. I thought about the people who had just proven they were willing to commit arson to collect debts. "You can't stay with me," I said quietly. "I'm sorry, but you can't. It's not safe for any of us." My mother's face crumpled with fresh tears. "Sarah, please, we have nowhere else to go." "You'll have somewhere to go," I said, pulling out my phone to call David, my financial advisor. "But first, we're going to solve this problem permanently." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. "I mean I'm going to pay off your debt. All of it. But not the way you think." As I walked away to make my calls, I heard my father ask Jake, "What does she mean, not the way we think?" By the time the sun came up, I had a plan that would save my family's lives and teach them a lesson they'd never forget. What do you think will happen next? By 10 a.m., I was sitting across from Vincent Carlucci in his perfectly legitimate construction company office. He was exactly what you'd expect from someone whose side business involved enforcing gambling debts. Thick-necked, expensive suit, hands that had clearly seen more than desk work. Marcus sat beside me, alert but relaxed. Having a professional bodyguard tends to encourage civilized behavior, even among people who burn houses down for a living. "Miss Patterson," Carlucci said with surprising politeness, "I understand you want to discuss your brother's debt. I want to pay it off. In full. Today." His eyebrows rose slightly. "That's refreshing. Most families try to negotiate. I'm not most families, but I have conditions." "I'm listening." I slid a cashier's check across his desk for $80,000. His eyes widened slightly at the amount. "This pays Jake's debt completely. No interest, no penalties, no future obligations." "Agreed." "Second condition. You and your organization will have no further contact with any member of my family. No phone calls, no visits, no messages through intermediaries." He nodded slowly. "Third condition, and this is the important one. My brother doesn't know I'm paying this debt." Carlucci leaned back in his chair, clearly intrigued. "Explain." "As far as Jake knows, he still owes you $80,000. He still thinks you might burn down another building or hurt someone he cares about. He still lives with the consequences of his choices." A slow smile spread across Carlucci's face. "You want him to suffer without actually suffering. I want him to learn what accountability feels like. Real accountability, not just empty promises to pay money back someday. What if he tries to borrow more money elsewhere to pay me? Then he'll discover that every legitimate and illegitimate lender in the city has been informed about his existing debt to you. No one will touch him." Marcus had helped me arrange this through his network of contacts. Jake would find himself completely cut off from credit, unable to borrow so much as gas money without family approval. And if he confesses to family about the debt, then he'll discover his family doesn't have $80,000 lying around anymore. I smiled. I transferred most of my liquid assets into accounts he can't access and investments he can't liquidate. Carlucci was quiet for a long moment, studying me with something like professional admiration. "You're willing to pay $80,000 to teach your brother a lesson?" "I'm willing to pay $80,000 to save my family's lives and possibly prevent Jake from gambling himself into an early grave." "And what about your parents? They lost their house because of his debt. They'll get a new house eventually, when Jake proves he can stay away from gambling and they prove they can stop enabling him." I stood up, smoothing my skirt with hands that were steadier than I'd expected. "Do we have a deal, Mr. Carlucci?" He picked up the check, examined it briefly, then slipped it into his jacket pocket. "We have a deal. Your brother's debt is paid, but as far as he knows, he still owes me 80 grand and I'm getting impatient." "How impatient?" "Let's say he'll be very motivated to find alternative solutions to his problems." As Marcus and I left the construction office, I felt strangely calm. For the first time in years, I'd made a decision about my family that wasn't driven by guilt or manipulation. "Impressive strategy," Marcus commented as we drove back toward downtown. "Expensive, but impressive. The money isn't the point anymore. It's about whether they can learn to make better choices when they think their lives depend on it." My phone started ringing before we reached the next traffic light. Jake, probably wondering if I'd reconsidered helping with his little debt problem. I let it go to voicemail. By evening, I had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages from various family members, each more desperate than the last. I read through them while having dinner at my kitchen counter. Marcus reviewing security footage from the building's cameras on his laptop beside me. Sarah, please call back. These people aren't patient. Dad's talking about selling the business for whatever he can get. You're the only one who can help. I know you're angry, but people's lives are at stake now. Just this once. Sarah, I swear I'll never gamble again. That last message from Jake made me laugh out loud. He'd made that promise at least a dozen times before, usually while asking for money to cover gambling debts. Something amusing? Marcus asked without looking up from his laptop. My brother promising he'll never gamble again. How many times has he made that promise? Lost count after the first year? Marcus finally looked up from his screen. And you believe this time might be different? I thought about Jake sitting in that ambulance, watching his choices burn down his parents' house. About the fear in his eyes when he realized the people he owed weren't just going to accept partial payments and empty promises. I believe terror is an excellent motivator for behavioral change. And if it isn't? I finished my wine and set the glass down with deliberate precision. Then he'll discover that some lessons are more expensive than others. The intervention happened Saturday morning at my hotel suite downtown. I'd moved out of my apartment temporarily after Marcus suggested that my family's current situation might attract unwanted attention from law enforcement investigating the arson. My parents arrived first, looking like refugees from their own lives. 3 days of hotel living had stripped away their usual middle-class polish, leaving them raw and desperate. Jake and Michelle came in separately, tension crackling between them like static electricity. Apparently, Michelle had some opinions about Jake's gambling that she hadn't shared before their house burned down. Thank you all for coming, I said, settling into the chair I'd positioned to face the couch where they sat huddled together like survivors of a shipwreck. Sarah, my father began, we need to discuss... Actually, Dad, I need to discuss some things with all of you, starting with honesty. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the photos Marcus had taken of their burned house. This is what Jake's gambling problem looks like now, not credit card debt or missed mortgage payments, arson, death threats, people who solve collection problems with gasoline and matches. Jake flinched at the directness of my words. I know you owe Vincent Carlucci $80,000. I know he's given you until Monday to pay or face consequences worse than losing Mom and Dad's house. My mother gasped. Monday? That's tomorrow. I know you've called everyone you can think of, trying to borrow money. I know you've considered asking me for help. Jake's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah, here's what's going to happen, I continued, not letting him finish. You're going to figure this out without my money. The silence that followed was profound. But people could die, Michelle said finally. Yes, they could. That's what happens when you borrow money from criminals and then can't pay it back. My mother started crying again. Sarah, how can you be so cold? I'm not being cold, Mom. I'm being realistic. For years, I've been enabling Jake's gambling by bailing him out every time he gets in trouble. But this situation is beyond money now. This is about consequences. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the traffic moving through downtown streets where people went about their normal Saturday activities, unaware that 4 blocks away a family was discussing whether someone might die over gambling debts. Jake has made choices that put all of you in danger. Not just financial danger, physical danger. And you're all still looking to me to fix it. Because you can fix it, Jake said desperately. $80,000 is nothing to you. You're right. $80,000 is nothing to me. But what happens next month when you owe them another $50,000? Or next year when it's $200,000? I turned back to face them. When does it end, Jake? When you get Mom and Dad killed? When you get yourself killed? When you gamble away so much money that even my trust fund can't cover your debts? I'll stop, he said. The same promise he'd made countless times before. I swear to God, Sarah, I'll never gamble again. You'll stop because you're scared right now. But what happens when the fear wears off and you see a sure thing at the track? Or when you have a bad day at work and decide poker will make you feel better? Jake looked around the room for support from his parents or wife, but found none. They were all finally seeing the same truth I'd been trying to ignore for years. So you're just going to let them kill me? He asked. I'm going to let you experience the full consequences of your choices for the first time in your adult life. Maybe that will motivate you to make better ones. Sarah, my father said quietly, if something happens to Jake, we'll never forgive you. And if I keep enabling his gambling, we'll all be having this same conversation next year or the year after, until eventually someone does get hurt. I gathered my purse and jacket. I'm leaving for Chicago tomorrow morning. Marcus found me a consultant position there that should keep me busy for the next few months. You're running away, Michelle accused. I'm removing myself from a situation where people expect me to solve problems I didn't create with money I don't owe them. As I reached the door, Jake called out one last desperate plea. Sarah, please, I'm begging you. I turned back to face my brother one final time. Jake, I love you, but I love you too much to keep enabling your self-destruction. I left them there in the hotel suite, finally forced to confront the reality of Jake's choices without the safety net of my inheritance to cushion their fall. By evening, I was on a plane to Chicago, watching Seattle disappear beneath the clouds. I didn't know if my family would survive what was coming next, but I knew that if they did survive, it would be because they'd finally learned to save themselves. The call came Tuesday morning while I was having coffee in my temporary Chicago apartment. Marcus, his voice carefully controlled in the way that meant he was delivering bad news. Miss Sarah, your brother's in the hospital. My heart stopped. Is he alive? He's alive. 2 broken ribs, concussion, various cuts and bruises. He'll recover fully. I sank into the kitchen chair, relief and guilt warring in my chest. What happened? Carlucci's people paid him a visit Monday night. Nothing fatal, just a reminder that Monday's deadline had passed. Even though I knew Jake's debt had been paid, hearing about the beating made me feel physically sick. I'd orchestrated this whole scenario, including the part where my brother got hurt. There's something else, Marcus continued. The police are investigating. Jake didn't give them Carlucci's name, but they're asking questions about his gambling debts. This was spiraling beyond my control. Police involvement meant federal attention, which meant my carefully planned lesson was about to become a criminal investigation. I need to come back to Seattle. I wouldn't recommend that right now. Your family believes you're responsible for what happened to Jake. Responsible how? They think your refusal to pay his debts led directly to the beating. Your parents are talking about cutting off contact permanently. I stared out the window at Lake Michigan, watching boats move across water that reflected the gray November sky. My plan had been to teach Jake a lesson about consequences while keeping him safe. Instead, I'd orchestrated a situation where he got beaten by criminals while my family blamed me for his injuries. Marcus, I need you to do something for me. Of course. I need you to tell Carlucci that the arrangement has changed. Jake's debt is still paid, but I want his people to stay away completely now. No more reminders, no more visits. That wasn't part of the original agreement? Then we'll pay him more. Whatever it takes to make sure Jake doesn't get hurt again. There was a pause. Miss Sarah, are you reconsidering your position on helping your family? Was I? Sitting in a strange city, drinking coffee in an unfamiliar kitchen while my brother recovered from a beating that I'd indirectly caused. The boundaries I'd established seemed less like protection and more like cruelty. I don't know anymore. That evening, I called the hospital in Seattle and asked to speak with Jake. The nurse said he was sleeping, but my mother was there. Sarah? Her voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. How is he? How do you think he is? He looks like he was hit by a truck. Mom, just don't. I don't want to hear about boundaries or lessons or tough love. My son is lying in a hospital bed because you refused to help your family. The accusation hit like a physical blow because part of me believed it was true. I was trying to help him in a different way. By letting criminals beat him unconscious, I closed my eyes, trying to find words that would explain my reasoning without revealing that I'd actually paid Jake's debt months ago. Mom, Jake's gambling problem was going to lead to this eventually. If not with these people, then with others. At least this way. At least this way what, Sarah? At least this way you get to feel superior while your brother suffers? The line went dead. I sat in the growing darkness of my Chicago apartment, phone still in my hand, finally understanding the difference between consequences and cruelty. Jake had learned his lesson. The fear in his eyes as he lay in that hospital bed would probably keep him away from gambling for years, maybe forever. But the cost of that lesson might be my entire family. At midnight, I called Marcus one final time. I want to come home and I want to tell them the truth about what I did. Are you sure? Once you reveal that you paid Carlucci, there's no going back to the boundaries you established. The boundaries don't matter if my family is destroyed. And if they're angry that you let Jake get beaten when you could have prevented it, I thought about Jake in his hospital bed, about my mother's cold voice, about my father who hadn't even taken my call since the beating. Then I'll deal with that too. But I can't live with myself knowing I caused this and let them blame themselves. Sometimes the hardest lesson isn't learning to set boundaries. Sometimes it's learning when those boundaries have become walls that hurt the people you're trying to protect. I flew back to Seattle on Wednesday morning and went directly to the hospital. Jake was awake, looking like he'd been in a car accident. Both eyes were black, his lip was split, and he moved carefully because of his broken ribs. But he was alive, and for the first time in years, he was completely sober. "Sarah," he said when I walked into his room. His voice was hoarse from the concussion. "I didn't think you'd come. I'm your sister, of course I came." My parents were there too, sitting in chairs by the window with the exhausted look of people who'd been keeping vigil for days. They acknowledged my presence with nods but no warmth. "Jake," I said, pulling up a chair beside his bed, "I need to tell you something important. If this is about the money, it is about the money, but not the way you think." I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded document, the receipt from my cashier's check to Vincent Carlucci. "Your debt was paid 5 days ago. In full, before you got hurt." Jake stared at the receipt, confusion clouding his bruised features. "I don't understand. I paid Vincent Carlucci $80,000 last Friday. Your debt to him was completely settled." My father leaned forward in his chair. "Then why did they beat him up?" "Because I asked them to." The silence that followed was profound and dangerous. I could feel the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. "You asked them to beat up your own brother?" my mother whispered. "I asked them to continue acting like Jake owed them money, so he would learn what his gambling addiction really costs." Jake struggled to sit up straighter, wincing with the movement. "You set me up? I protected you from the real consequences while making sure you experienced enough fear to motivate change." "You son of a—" Jake started, then stopped himself, probably because swearing with a split lip was painful. My father stood up slowly, his face a mask of controlled fury. "You paid criminals to terrorize your brother? I paid criminals to cancel his debt and then pretend they hadn't been paid so Jake would finally understand understand what?" my mother demanded. "That his own sister would rather see him beaten than simply help him?" This wasn't going the way I'd imagined. I'd thought they'd be angry about the deception, but grateful that Jake was safe and his debt was resolved. Instead, they looked at me like I was a stranger. "You let me think I was going to die," Jake said quietly. "For 5 days, I thought those people were going to kill me. Do you have any idea what that feels like? Do you have any idea what it feels like to watch someone you love destroy themselves and everyone around them with their addiction?" "So you decided to play God?" my father asked. "You decided that psychological torture was an appropriate response to Jake's problems?" "I decided that enablement wasn't working and maybe fear would be more effective than money." Michelle, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke. "You're sick, Sarah. What kind of person does something like this to their own family?" I looked around the room at 4 people who'd been the center of my world for 26 years, seeing in their faces that something fundamental had broken that might never heal. The kind of person who watches her brother gamble away every opportunity, every relationship, every dollar he can borrow or steal, and finally decides that protecting him from consequences is actually killing him. By having him beaten up? Jake's voice was getting stronger as his anger built. By making the consequences real enough to motivate change without being permanent enough to destroy your life. I stood up, knowing that staying longer would only make things worse. "Jake, your debt is paid. You're safe. The gambling stops now because you've seen where it leads, but you're alive to make better choices. Get out," my mother said quietly. "Mom, get out of this room, Sarah. Get out of this hospital. Get out of our lives." I looked at Jake one last time, seeing in his battered face not gratitude for being saved, but hatred for being manipulated. "I'm sorry you got hurt," I said, "but I'm not sorry that you're safe." As I walked toward the door, Jake called after me. "You want to know the really sick part, Sarah? I actually was ready to quit gambling. Watching Mom and Dad's house burn down, seeing what my choices cost other people, that was enough. You didn't need to have me beaten up to teach me a lesson I'd already learned." I stopped with my hand on the door handle. "But now," Jake continued, "now every time I think about quitting, I'll remember my own sister paying people to hurt me, and I'll wonder if staying away from gambling is what I want, or just what you manipulated me into doing." I left the hospital knowing that my family was safe, Jake's debt was paid, and his gambling would probably stop. I also left knowing that the price of those victories was losing everyone I'd tried to save. 6 months later, I was living permanently in Chicago, working for a consulting firm that specialized in family wealth management. Ironic, considering how spectacularly I'd managed my own family wealth situation. Marcus had found me an apartment in Lincoln Park with lake views and professional security. My life was quiet, orderly, and lonely in ways I'd never experienced before. The text message came on a Tuesday evening while I was making dinner for one in my sterile, modern kitchen. "Sarah, this is Jake. Mom's in the hospital. Heart attack. Thought you should know." I stared at the phone for a full minute before calling him back. "How bad is it?" I asked when he answered. "She's stable now. Doctors say the stress of the past few months probably contributed to it. The implication hung in the air between us. My choices, my manipulation, my decision to prioritize teaching lessons over family harmony had put additional stress on my mother's heart. Jake, she's been asking for you, he interrupted. For weeks now. Dad didn't want me to call, but she made me promise. How are you? I asked. Really? A long pause. Clean. 187 days without gambling. I go to meetings. I have a sponsor. I'm doing the work. Relief flooded through me. I'm glad. Are you? Or are you just satisfied that your plan worked? I couldn't answer that question because I wasn't sure myself. I'm flying back tonight, I said instead. Sarah, you should know. Dad's still pretty angry. And Michelle, she filed for divorce last month. My heart sank. Because of the gambling? Because of everything. The lies, the debts, the danger I put everyone in. And because she can't forgive you for what you did, which means she can't forgive me for being related to you. Another casualty of my decision to choose consequences over compassion. I found my mother in intensive care, looking fragile and older than I remembered. My father sat beside her bed, holding her hand with the desperate grip of someone afraid to let go. Dad. He looked up when I entered, his expression cycling through surprise, anger, and exhaustion before settling on resignation. She wanted to see you, he said simply. My mother's eyes opened when she heard my voice. Sarah? I'm here, Mom. I need to tell you something, she whispered, her voice weak but urgent. You need to rest. No, listen. I was wrong about Jake, about enabling him. You were right that we were making his problem worse. I felt tears starting. The first I'd shed since leaving Seattle 6 months earlier. But Sarah, she continued, squeezing my hand with surprising strength, you were wrong about how to fix it. Fear isn't love. Manipulation isn't protection. I know, Mom. I'm sorry. Are you? Or do you still think you did the right thing? It was the same question Jake had asked. And I still didn't have a good answer. I think I saved Jake's life, I said finally. But I think I destroyed our family to do it. My mother closed her eyes considering this. Maybe, she said eventually. Or maybe you gave us all a chance to start over and do better. She looked at my father. Richard, give us a minute. After he left, she turned back to me with eyes that were clearer than they'd been in months. Jake's gambling nearly got people killed. Your father and I spent years pretending it was just a phase he'd grow out of. We all failed each other. But what you did was wrong. What? But it came from love, not cruelty. And maybe that's enough to build on. Over the next 3 days, while my mother recovered, something shifted in our family dynamic. Not healing exactly, but a kind of exhausted honesty that we'd never had before. Jake and I talked for hours in the hospital cafeteria, dissecting our relationship and the patterns that had brought us to this point. He was angry about the deception, but he also acknowledged that 6 months of sobriety had given him clarity about how destructive his gambling had become. My father remained distant, but civil, focused on my mother's recovery rather than relitigating the past. On Thursday evening, as my mother was being discharged, she asked me to walk with her to the parking garage. Are you coming back to Seattle? She asked. I don't know. Do you want me to? She stopped walking and turned to face me. I want you to come back when you're ready to be part of this family again. Not its savior or its bank account. What's the difference? Family members trust each other enough to ask for help directly, instead of manipulating each other into better behavior. I thought about this as we resumed walking. What if asking for help doesn't work? Then we fail together instead of succeeding alone. 6 months later, I moved back to Seattle. Not to my old life of family bailouts and boundary violations, but to something new we built together through honest conversations, family therapy, and the slow work of rebuilding trust. Jake celebrated 2 years of sobriety last month. My parents sold their business and downsized to a smaller house they could afford without family loans. Michelle and Jake divorced but maintained a cordial relationship focused on co-parenting. We're not the same family we were before the gas station incident, the fire, or the hospital confrontation. We're better. Not perfect, not without ongoing challenges, but better. Because sometimes the most important lesson isn't learning to set boundaries or stick to principles. Sometimes it's learning that love requires both protection and forgiveness, and that the hardest person to forgive is often yourself. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about family, forgiveness, and finding your way back to the people who matter most.